Have you ever been insulted? Attacked? Mocked? Disrespected? A Stoic doesn't respond the way you might think. They don't explode. They don't retaliate. They don't lose control. They do something far more powerful. They don't let other people's emotions dictate their own inner state. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You can choose not to be harmed, and if you choose not to, you haven't been." What follows are 10 things Stoics do when insulted. Each one a chance to turn provocation into personal discipline. If you're ready to stop being controlled by emotion and start mastering it, subscribe now. 1. The power of the pause. When you don't react, you reclaim your mind. There is a precise moment, fleeting, often overlooked, that stands between what is done to you and how you choose to respond. That split second of awareness is not just a delay. It is where your freedom lives. It is the space where men rise above impulse and reclaim control over their lives. You felt it before. The heat rising in your chest when someone insults you. The sharp edge of your pride ready to lash out. The instinct to strike back, to prove something. Anything. But what if the real power wasn't in fighting back? What if the greatest strength a man could wield was restraint? The Stoics knew this intimately. Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That single sentence holds a revolutionary truth. You are not a puppet to your emotions. You are not at the mercy of other people's words. You have a choice. And that choice begins with the pause. Modern life doesn't teach men how to pause. It teaches us how to dominate, respond, retaliate. But domination without direction is chaos. Power without pause becomes self-destruction. Every time someone insults you, undermines you, mocks you, they are not taking something from you. They are offering you a test. Not of your strength, but of your sovereignty. In the pause, you get to ask yourself, is this reaction worthy of me? Is this aligned with the man I want to become? Or am I simply being pulled by the invisible strings of my ego? Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, ruled over millions but constantly reminded himself that true power was not political, it was personal. He wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The world will always provoke you. Your discipline is not to remove the provocations. It is to master the space between. When you feel insulted, humiliated, provoked, pause. Not to repress, but to reclaim. Reclaim your thoughts. Reclaim your center. Reclaim your energy from the claws of another person's opinion. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become strategic. Still water reflects clearly. Stormy water reflects nothing. In that pause, you're not doing nothing. You're doing the hardest thing a man can do in a reactive world. You're choosing. You're choosing not to be a slave to the moment. You're choosing clarity over chaos. You're choosing growth over gratification. You're choosing to own your response. And that, my friend, is how freedom begins. A reactive man is owned by the world. A reflective man owns himself. Pick one moment, just one, when you feel disrespected or triggered. Pause for 3 seconds before doing or saying anything. Then write down what you felt and what you chose instead. Do this once a day. You'll start to notice something profound. You're no longer at the mercy of life. You're guiding it. To the inner label, you are hurt only by what you name as harm. You paused. You reclaimed a moment. And in doing so, you started to reclaim your mind. But here's the deeper layer, one most men never dare to confront. It's not the insult that hurts you. It's your belief that it was an insult in the first place. The wound doesn't lie in their words. It lies in the label you attach to those words. This is where the Stoic practice becomes truly internal, truly powerful. Epictetus made this piercingly clear when he said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." Let that sink in. Two men can hear the same insult. One laughs and lets it go. The other stews in anger for days. What's the difference? Not the insult. The interpretation. Modern culture teaches us to personalize everything. To assign meaning. To get offended. To assume malice. But a Stoic understands, meaning isn't embedded in the event. Meaning is something you give. And just as you gave it, you can take it back. Think of it like this. Words are like arrows, but they only penetrate if you lower your shield. And your shield is not aggression. It's not revenge. It's your judgment. Your ability to see things clearly, without the fog of ego. Marcus Aurelius, again writing in solitude amidst the chaos of empire, reminds us. If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. And it is in your power to wipe out that judgment now. This is not denial. This is dominion. The Stoic doesn't pretend the world is kind. He just refuses to be manipulated by its cruelty. When someone mocks you, asks if you're man enough, tries to embarrass you in front of others, laughs behind your back, ask yourself, truly, what makes this an insult? Is it their words, or your need to be seen a certain way? The truth might sting, but it will also set you free. You get hurt not because they hit something inside you, but because you believe their words hold the power to define you. And the moment you stop believing that, you become untouchable. This is what the Stoics meant by inner freedom. It's not a fantasy. It's not suppression. It's a constant reminder that your worth, your identity, your direction, comes from within, not from someone else's passing remark. This mindset doesn't make you a doormat. It makes you undefeatable. Because the man who needs no validation fears no insult. And the man who fears no insult commands respect without ever having to demand it. You are only as wounded as the meaning you assign. Withdraw the meaning, and you disarm the insult. The next time someone says something that stings, pause. And then ask yourself, what part of me believes this is true? Write down your honest answer. You may be surprised to find that the insult is not about them, it's about what you haven't yet released. Then, rewrite the statement. Not to avoid it, but to reframe it. Example. He thinks I'm weak. I don't need his belief to know my strength. She mocked me. Her words say more about her than about me. Do this daily. You'll begin to see how much of your pain was self-inflicted. And you'll begin the quiet, powerful work of reowning your peace. 3. The strategic silence. When you stop reacting, they lose their power. So now, you've paused. You've stripped the insult of its illusion. You've realized the sting wasn't in their words, but in your willingness to believe them. But what happens next? When you don't bite the bait, when you no longer rise to the jab, the criticism, the snide remark, what happens to them? What happens to the one who tried to provoke you? They lose. Not in a loud, victorious way, but in silence. In the kind of silence that unsettles people because it denies them the control they thought they had over you. This is where Stoicism becomes not just personal, but strategic. A Stoic does not remain silent because he's afraid to speak. He remains silent because he chooses not to engage in battles that aren't worth fighting. Because he knows that true power doesn't roar, it remains still. Seneca once said, "It is not that we are given a short life, but we make it short by wasting it." How much of your life, your attention, your energy, has been spent reacting to nonsense? Trying to prove yourself to people who will never understand you? Trying to defend a version of you that only exists in their limited perception? The Stoic doesn't play that game. Because he knows this, every time you react to someone's provocation, you hand them your power. You give them access to your state, to your time, to your peace. But when you remain still, when you observe instead of explode, something unexpected happens. They falter. They misfire. They reveal their weakness. Because most people don't insult you from strength, they insult you from a desire for attention, or control, or chaos. They want your outrage, your defensiveness, your need to correct them. They want you to validate their importance through your reaction. But if you offer them nothing, no emotion, no response, no sign that they touched anything inside you, you become a mirror they cannot distort. And in that moment, you reverse the dynamic. You go from being their target to being their teacher. Not by preaching, not by correcting, but by showing that silence is not submission, it's sovereignty. And yes, it will confuse them. It will unsettle them. It might even anger them. Because silence is a language they never learned to speak. It says, I don't owe you anything, not my anger, not my time, not my explanation. Marcus Aurelius lived by this in court, in war, and in private reflection. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. That is the Stoic's posture, not reaction, but redirection. Redirecting attention from the outside world back to the inner citadel. Refusing to waste sacred energy on petty disturbances. This silence is not a void. It is filled with intention. It is a strategy. A training. A refusal to be led around by your emotions like a dog on a leash. Your silence is not weakness. It's a weapon. Use it wisely, and you win before the battle begins. Find one conversation, online or in person, where your instinct is to respond, clap back, prove a point. Don't. Instead, breathe. Write down what you would have said, then delete it. Let it go. See how the power shifts when you don't hand yours away. Do this today. Tomorrow. The next day. Not to be passive, but to be precise. 4. The trial of the moment. Every insult is a test, not a command. You felt the shift. You've remained still in the face of provocation. And maybe, just maybe, you noticed the discomfort it caused in others. Not because you retaliated, but because you didn't. You didn't grant them what they came for, your reaction. And in that quiet refusal, something powerful began to take shape inside you. But let's take this further. Let's reframe the entire experience of being insulted. Because here's the truth that Stoicism offers, and it changes everything. Being insulted is not an attack. It's a test. Not of your worth, but of your discipline. Not of your masculinity, but of your mastery. We live in a time where outrage is currency. Where every slight, every perceived offense, every tone of voice becomes ammunition. But to the Stoic, these moments are not commands to get angry, they are exercises in restraint. They are part of your training. Seneca wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. The insult is not there to diminish you. It's there to expose where you are still reactive. Where you're still vulnerable to the opinions of others. Where the armor of your composure still has cracks. In the same way a fighter welcomes pressure to sharpen his form, the Stoic welcomes adversity, not because he enjoys pain, but because he sees it as a forge. And in that forge, every insult becomes a chance to burn off weakness. Every jab becomes a lesson. Every judgment becomes an invitation, not to react, but to refine. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by power, politics, betrayal, once wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He didn't just endure difficulty, he absorbed it. He used it. He grew from it. So when someone tries to provoke you, don't just remain silent. See it for what it is, a mirror. What do you see? Do you flinch? Do you fire back? Or do you smile internally, knowing that this is just another rep in your training? Because the man who passes this test once becomes stronger. But the man who welcomes the test, over and over, becomes unshakable. That is what Stoicism trains you for, not just serenity, but strength through serenity. Not to retreat from the world, but to engage with it on your terms, undisturbed by its noise. And make no mistake, this doesn't mean you never speak up. It means when you do, it's not from ego. It's from clarity. From purpose. From power, not insecurity. The insult doesn't command your rage. It offers you a challenge. And when you rise to that challenge with composure, you've already won. Every insult is a mirror. The Stoic doesn't flinch, he studies the reflection and then trains harder. Look back on a recent moment that triggered you, an argument, a post, a confrontation. Write it down. Now, reframe it. What did it test in you? What weakness did it reveal? Not to shame yourself, but to understand. Then ask, what response would my highest self have chosen? Carry that version of you forward. And next time the insult comes, because it will, you'll know what it really is. Another chance to strengthen the mind, just as hardship strengthens the body. 5. The circle of control. You don't control their words, only your response. You've come this far. You've seen the insult for what it really is, not a threat, but a test. And when you stop seeing insults as attacks and begin treating them as opportunities for growth, you cross the line that few ever do. Now, it's time to go deeper. Because beyond the pause, beyond the silence, beyond even the reframing of pain, there lies a profound realization that anchors the Stoic mindset. You do not control what others say. You only control how you respond. This may seem obvious at first glance, simple, almost cliché. But live it deeply, and it becomes one of the most liberating truths a man can hold. Epictetus built his entire philosophy on this distinction. In the Enchiridion, he laid it out plainly. Some things are up to us, and some are not. It sounds small, but it is the line between slavery and sovereignty. Because most people spend their lives tangled in the wrong side of that equation. They try to control what others think of them. They obsess over how they're perceived. They argue, plead, shout, desperate to manipulate the minds of those who misunderstand them. And what does it get them? Bitterness. Frustration. A life dictated by people who don't even know who they truly are. But the Stoic draws a circle. Inside that circle is everything he can control, his thoughts, his words, his actions, his attitude. Outside the circle, everything else, other people's opinions, insults, moods, reactions, judgments. The wise man does not try to pull things into the circle that don't belong there. He doesn't waste a drop of energy trying to control what is inherently uncontrollable. Because he understands, freedom isn't found in getting others to change. It's found in mastering your response to what they do. That is where your power lives. Not in silencing the crowd, but in silencing the storm inside you. Let them talk. Let them shout. Let them misunderstand you. That's their side of the line. Your side? Composure. Clarity. Control. Marcus Aurelius, again, puts it into brutal clarity. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. That's not weakness. That's the deepest strength imaginable, the ability to be unmoved by what isn't yours to control. Not because you don't care, but because you care more about your integrity than your image. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become selective. You speak only when it serves your principles, not your pride. You respond only when silence would compromise your values, not your vanity. This discipline doesn't numb you. It frees you. Because once you stop trying to control the world, you start directing your energy where it matters most, within. Anchor thought. Freedom begins the moment you stop trying to control what's not yours and start mastering what is. Your practice today. Draw 2 circles on paper. In the first, write what you're currently trying to control in your life that isn't yours. People's opinions. Their tone. Their recognition. Their validation. In the second, write what actually is within your control. Your breath. Your posture. Your attitude. Your next move. Spend 10 minutes today focusing only on that inner circle. Just 10 minutes where you don't worry about changing anyone or anything but yourself. You'll feel it, that sense of grounding, of returning to your power. This practice isn't just a mental exercise. It's a map back to your center. 6. Holding the line. When you don't react, you take away their power. You've drawn the line. You now know what belongs to you and what doesn't. What to control and what to release. And something powerful has begun to happen, maybe subtly at first, but unmistakably. Your peace is no longer up for negotiation. But what happens when someone crosses the line anyway? When they push. When they press. When they want something from you, and that something is your reaction? This is where the Stoic doesn't just withstand insult, he neutralizes it. He doesn't lash out. He doesn't explain. He doesn't play the game. He holds the line with silence. Not because he's avoiding conflict, but because he refuses to be baited into a battle that was never his to begin with. The ones who provoke you, the passive aggressors, the loud critics, the petty rivals, they don't want answers. They want your energy. They want your volatility. They want to rattle something inside you and prove they can touch a nerve. But when they don't get it, when you give them nothing, they don't just lose the argument. They lose their weapon. Because the only weapon they had was your willingness to let them inside. Seneca, who knew the viciousness of Roman politics firsthand, said it plainly. A great mind becomes invincible by disregarding insults and wrongs. This is not about repression. It's about refusal. Refusing to be pulled into someone else's chaos. Refusing to trade your stillness for their satisfaction. Refusing to perform your pain just because someone else wants to see it. It's not about being passive. It's about being unavailable to nonsense. Imagine that. Being a man so rooted in his own frame, so grounded in his own mind, that nothing, no glare, no jab, no judgment, can shake him off center. That's the kind of presence that stops conversations when you enter a room. Not because you're loud, but because you don't flinch. That's the kind of discipline that doesn't just protect your peace, it commands respect. And this isn't theoretical. It's practical. It's trained. Every time you're baited and don't bite, you're building something. A thicker skin. A sharper eye. A deeper sense of self-possession. This silence is a practice. A stance. A signal. It says, you cannot move me. Because I don't need your validation, your reaction, or your recognition to know who I am. Commit this to memory. Silence in the face of provocation is not weakness, it is strength so well trained, it no longer needs to prove itself. Your challenge this week. The next time someone pushes your buttons, online, at work, in your own home, don't react. Don't explain. Don't defend. Don't try to control the narrative. Say nothing. Hold your breath for 5 seconds. And then, walk away, physically or mentally. Later, write down what happened. Notice how your lack of reaction shifted the balance of power. Notice how their behavior lost momentum when it didn't feed off yours. This is how men build unshakable discipline, not through aggression, but through control. And if you want more moments like this, more ways to sharpen that control and live with clarity in a chaotic world, this is your space. Subscribe now. Not to follow noise, but to master the silence. 7. Response over reaction, the discipline of choosing, not flinching. You've stood still. You've refused debate. You've watched the power dynamics shift the moment you withheld your reaction. That quiet strength, the restraint that doesn't flinch, has begun to feel familiar now. Even natural. But here's the next level. Because Stoicism doesn't just teach you to stop reacting, it teaches you to start choosing. And there's a world of difference between the two. Most men live their lives in reflex. Something happens, and they strike back. Someone disrespects them, and they defend. An insult is thrown, and they throw one harder. It feels like strength in the moment. But what it really is surrender. Surrender to impulse. Surrender to pride. Surrender to anything that knows how to push your buttons. The Stoic way? It doesn't demand that you become emotionless. It demands that you become conscious. That you build a gap between what happens and what you do next. That you don't just feel and fire, but feel, pause, and choose. Epictetus made this distinction with piercing clarity. It is not events themselves that disturb people, but their judgments about those events. And judgment is not instantaneous. It is a process. One that belongs to you, and you alone. A reaction is instinct. A response is intention. That gap, no matter how small, is where self-mastery is forged. You are not a wild animal, bound to your instincts. You are a man. And that means you carry within you the ability to direct your behavior with purpose, even under pressure. Let someone provoke you today. Let them challenge you. And then watch that space open up inside you, the one you've been building these last few days. In that space, ask yourself, is what I'm about to say aligned with who I want to be? Is this action coming from clarity or from ego? Would my future self thank me for this response? That's what separates the wise from the reactive, the calm from the chaotic, the man who chooses his actions from the one who chases his emotions. Marcus Aurelius practiced this every single day, even while leading Rome through wars and plagues. He wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That was the filter. And it worked, not because he was emperor, but because he was disciplined enough to pause and apply it, again and again. This is how the Stoic trains. Not once. Not when it's easy. But daily. Especially when it's hardest. Remember this line. Every reaction is a surrender. Every response is a decision. Master the gap, and you master yourself. Today's challenge. Choose one daily trigger. Something small but familiar, a sarcastic comment, a rude tone, a dismissive glance. When it shows up, don't respond right away. Breathe. Step back mentally. Ask yourself, what would a man of principle do right now? Then, and only then, act. Write it down that night. Not what you felt, but what you chose. The moment you can track your decisions, you stop being ruled by instinct and start living by design. 8. The ego trap. When you let go of pride, you gain real power. By now, you've felt the strength that comes from response over reaction. You've experienced the gap. You've stood still while the world around you flinched. And perhaps you've asked yourself, the way all men on this path eventually do, why did I ever react in the first place? The answer lies beneath the surface. Not in the insult. Not in the words. Not in the person saying them. But in you. In your need to be seen a certain way. In your reflex to protect an image of yourself that you think the world must honor. In a word, your ego. This is where the Stoic goes deeper than mere behavior. He doesn't just ask, what should I do? He asks, why does this bother me at all? And more often than not, the answer is this. Because I took it personally. Because I let my ego decide what was offensive. Because I believed that what they said threatened who I think I am. But here's the truth. The ego is fragile. It needs applause. It needs approval. It needs to win. And when it doesn't get those things, it panics and it lashes out. The Stoic man, however, does not serve his ego. He observes it. He studies it. And then, slowly and steadily, he disengages from it. Because he knows that ego is not strength, it's dependency. It's a need to be validated. A hunger to be right. A desperation to be respected, not because of who you are, but because of how you're perceived. Seneca warned us about this when he said, "He who is insulted is not harmed unless he thinks he is." That thinking comes from the ego. But the Stoic challenges that reflex. He does not aim to destroy his ego with violence. He dissolves it with perspective. When you're insulted and you feel that burn rising inside, ask yourself, what exactly am I defending right now? Is this a threat to my values or just to my vanity? Am I about to speak from my center or from my need to be seen? If the answer is ego, pause. Don't shame yourself. Just observe. And then let it pass. Because what you'll find, over time, is that the less you need to defend, the stronger you become. Not in the eyes of others, but in your own. That's where real power lives. Not in being admired. Not in being feared. But in being unbothered by the shifting opinions of people who don't know your soul. The Stoic becomes that man not by accident, but by subtraction. He subtracts the ego. He subtracts the noise. He subtracts the performance. Until what's left is essential, immovable, and clear. Burn this in. The man who no longer needs to defend his ego becomes the man no one can disturb. Your practice today. Catch your next moment of self-defense, not in the body, but in the mind. It might be a need to correct someone. A compulsion to prove you're right. A sting when you're misunderstood. Pause. Don't act. Ask instead. What part of me feels threatened right now? And then ask. What would happen if I let that go? Write down your answer. Not as judgment, but as insight. Because every time you let the ego step aside, your real self gets stronger. The one who doesn't need validation to stay grounded. The one who doesn't react just because it's expected. The one who owns his mind and, slowly, his world. 9. Calm is a weapon. How stillness becomes the most strategic response. You've begun to feel it now. That distance between the ego's craving and your actual self. The part of you that once needed to react, defend, correct, prove, is no longer the loudest voice in the room. And what's left, beneath all that noise, is something rare. Something most men go their whole lives chasing, but never find. Calm. But let's be clear. We're not talking about passive calm. Not the kind that's soft, avoidant, or submissive. The calm we speak of here is earned. Sharpened. Intentional. It is a weapon, wielded only by those who've trained themselves not to be pulled around by emotion like leaves in a storm. You don't stumble into this kind of composure. You craft it. Day by day. Decision by decision. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." That's what calm is, not indifference, but discernment. Not detachment from reality, but authority over your own nervous system. The ability to feel something and still not flinch. And this kind of stillness, it is not inactivity. It's the highest form of strategy. It says, I see what you're doing. I feel what you're trying to provoke. But I'm not letting you drag me into your storm. Because I've trained in stillness, and you haven't. And that difference? It tilts the entire field. Because the man who cannot remain calm becomes predictable. And the man who's predictable, he's easy to control. But the man who remains composed, measured, unshaken, he becomes dangerous in all the right ways. Because you don't know what he's thinking. You don't know what he's preparing. You just know he's not wasting his energy trying to win a battle that's beneath him. And here's the key. Calm isn't something you wait for. It's something you choose. Even when you're boiling inside. Especially then. Because calmness, in the Stoic frame, isn't the absence of pressure, it's your posture under pressure. It's how you sit in the fire and breathe anyway. It's how you let someone rage and keep your center. It's how you face insult, disrespect, and misunderstanding, and respond with precision, not panic. And yes, there will be times you slip. Times you lose your footing. But every time you choose calm when chaos knocks, you wire your nervous system for control. That's how the Stoic trains. Not through suppression, but through command. Keep this line close. Calm isn't weakness, it's restraint with teeth. The man who owns his calm owns the room. Your practice today. Choose a moment, any moment, where your natural reaction would be to raise your voice, argue, rush, or interrupt. Don't. Instead, pause. Slow your breath. Lower your shoulders. And ask yourself, what's the most composed version of me do right now? Then do it. Even if your hands are shaking. Even if your heart's racing. Especially if they are. Afterwards, write it down. Not just the outcome, but how it felt to stay calm when everything wanted you to erupt. This is how you turn calm into a reflex. Not by waiting for it, but by becoming the man who can summon it at will. 10. The final fortress. Your mind is a territory, not a battlefield. You've walked the path. You've paused instead of pounced. You've redefined insult as reflection. You've weaponized silence. You've drawn the circle of control and stepped inside it. You've chosen response over reaction and peeled back the layers of ego that once dictated your voice. And in the stillness, you've learned that calm is not passivity, it's presence. So now the question becomes, what exactly are you defending? Why does all this discipline matter? Why train so intensely to hold yourself still, composed, and unmoved in a world that constantly asks you to lose your temper? The answer is simple, but not easy. Because your mind is sacred ground. And if you don't defend it, every person you meet will walk through it with muddy boots. In Stoicism, the ultimate goal isn't just to endure chaos. It's to preserve peace. Not the kind of peace that depends on circumstances, but the kind that's earned, built, kept through 1,000 unseen choices. The kind that can't be taken, only surrendered. Marcus Aurelius wrote this in the Meditations. Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions, than your own soul. Retreat to consult yourself often. That is the final evolution. Not silence as a tactic. Not calm as an armor. But inner peace as a principle. You don't choose not to react because you're afraid of conflict. You choose not to react because your peace is more valuable than someone else's chaos. You don't lash out because your self-respect is greater than their insult. You don't explain yourself to everyone because your energy is currency and you no longer spend it recklessly. Because you've learned. You're not just defending yourself from them. You're protecting something deeper from yourself. Your values. Your clarity. Your mental state. Your ability to hear your own thoughts in a world that screams at you to be louder, faster, angrier. You've trained too long and too hard to hand over your mental clarity for someone else's entertainment. The man who walks away is not weak. He's committed to guarding what others gave up long ago, a mind that is his own. This is what the Stoic ultimately fights for. Not applause. Not dominance. Not revenge. But sovereignty. A quiet, unshakable knowing. I decide what matters. I decide what enters. I decide what stays. Let this be etched into you. Not every battle is worth your attention, because not every attack deserves access to your peace. Your final practice. Choose one situation this week, just one, where someone pushes you, pressures you, or tries to pull you into their emotional arena. And walk away. Not with bitterness. Not with smugness. But with clarity. Later, ask yourself, did I lose anything by staying silent? Or did I keep something far more valuable, my state, my strength, myself? Write it down. Reread it the next time you're tempted to hand your power away for a moment of ego. You've come too far for that now. You've built the fortress. Now keep the gates. If you'd like a condensed version of this full series and a printable guide, or want to go deeper into how to turn these practices into long-term daily rituals, I can help create that next. Just say the word. You've just walked a path most won't take. 10 principles. 10 opportunities to confront yourself. And if you've reflected even for a moment, you're not the same man you were when this video began. You no longer react on impulse. You pause. You observe. You choose. You've started to guard the stillness within. Not just stay calm on the outside. You no longer avoid conflict, you simply refuse to be ruled by it. That is the Stoic way. Not perfection. Not performance. But presence. If this resonated with you, leave one word in the comments that captures what you're walking away with. It could be control, clarity, discipline, stillness. And if you know someone who needs this message, send it to them. Like, share, and subscribe, not just to support the channel, but to support the kind of man you're becoming. Would you like me to now format this for use as a video script or voiceover with visual cues?